Chapter 17, within Part 3 of Alexander of Macedon by Harold Lamb, is Roxana. It was this winter, and in such a quest, that Alexandros met his wife. His division had tracked down a resistance force to a rocky height, shaped like a tower and called the Rock of Sogd. The defenders had withdrawn to the summit, well supplied with food. The first inspection convinced the Macedonians that this natural tower could not be stormed, nor broken down. Deep snow supplied the Bactrians with water in plenty. Alexandros had them hailed and offered them full amnesty to return to their dwellings. The Bactrians laughed at the summons. "Go back," they yelled at Alexandros, "and get yourself soldiers with wings. Then perhaps you can fly to this place of ours." Alexandros had heard that the family of Uxiart, a Bactrian chief, had taken refuge on the rock of Sogd, which was thought to be impregnable. The challenge of the defenders nettled him and gave him an idea at the same time, calling for the Agrianians and men experienced in cliff work. He made them an offer. A purse would be made up, starting at 12 talents for the winner, and ending with a few gold darics for the last man. They were to climb the rock at night, not along the eastern face, but up the chimney formation, across the ice surfaces, where apparently it could not be climbed. They were to reach the summit, above the defenders, by morning. This part of the cliff was not guarded, because it seemed to be unscalable. Some 300 experienced climbers volunteered. They studied the rock face, while they proved themselves with iron tent pegs and pliable ropes made out of flax. By Alexandros' order, each man also took a flag wrapped around his body. During the long winter night, the climbers worked upwards, driving in their iron pegs and slinging ropes where they could. Some 30 of them fell, disappearing into such deep drifts that their bodies were not found the next day. The survivors reached the summit after sunrise and signaled down to the officers, who sent out a herald to shout to the Bactrians. "Look," he shouted. "Look up, ye men of the mountain. We have found the soldiers with wings. They are there. Look for yourselves." And the Bactrians beheld, poised behind them against the sky, armed men waving banners that they might have been wings, poised in full sight of them. Alexandros had rehearsed this denouement with the climbers the evening before. The trick succeeded, and the rock of Sogd was surrendered. It was the last refuge of the mountain folk, and Alexandros climbed the approach to inspect it. The Bactrian officers made way for him reluctantly, and he went to the one house of size at the cliff's edge. A woman came out of the door, not prostrating herself before him. Standing there alone, she wanted him to speak. She had long braids, light as new wheat, twisted back from her head, and she was lovely to watch, afraid, but not going away. Her head glowed in the sunlight, and when they asked her name, they told him it was Roxana. Roxana is, what may I call him? The daughter of light. This barbarian child of a Bactrian lord, knowing no Greek, stirred some memory in Alexandros. He might have wished to take a wife from the Bactrians, but he seemed to desire Roxana. He took her hand, and she did not pull away, because she was now the chattel of the victor, to dispose of as he pleased. Well, Stockholm Syndrome. Taking a bracelet from his wrist, he glanced at it and put it on her arm. "Keep it," he said. for you will be my wife. Roxana went with him to India and bore him a son. Lacking Barcine's education, her thoughts centered upon two matters, her religion and her husband. She became in every sense Alexandros' wife. The army did not approve of this marriage to the Bactrian. Well, wasn't it a light-haired woman from the north that he got with in the first place back when he was a youth? So why should they not be surprised? One Secretus, one of the new arrivals, enjoyed the title of pilot-in-chief. Apparently, with Nearchus, he belonged to the chief of navigators, who had little to do as yet. Certainly at this stage he conformed to the prevailing fashion and began to keep a journal, a plotting of their daily position upon terra firma. But since one Onesicritus had an ear for marvels, he began to embroider his pilot's journal with sensational events. Alexandros and the older Macedonians remarked that his title should have been liar-in-chief. Like a lot of politicians. Out of Alexandros' journey into the steppes, the encounter with the chieftain of the wild Charismians, and the marriage to the barbarian Roxana. Onesicritus fashioned a juicy marvel. It seemed, as he finally wrote the tale, that Alexandros' renown had spread through the vast steppes of Asia until it reached the ears of the queen of the Amazons, of those fierce and warlike maidens who lived without the benefit of men. Whereupon the haughty queen, no less, sent messengers to Alexandros to inform him that she would meet with him at the edge of her grassland frontier to sleep with him one night in order to have a child by him. This was perhaps the first of many such tales and marvels of the Alexandros legend. On their part, the imaginative Persians, who had a fondness for hero tales and eulogy, had begun to associate Alexandros' deeds with their own folk memory of Kurush and the Niakan, the great ancestors. They traced this resemblance so that their own descendants would believe that they had served not a barbarian invader, but an Iranian hero. So in their writings, the journey into the steppes became an adventure of the heroic Iskander, who bore the twin eagle's wings on his helmet into the land of darkness, which took 30 days to traverse, under the beneficent guardianship of the Neocon, to the sun-illuminated Mount of Paradise. This mount, in later versions, Iskander climbed to converse with the spirit of Ahura Mazda. In the best Iranian traditions, then another purple patch was added, that Iskander had labored in this journey to build a great wall, saturated with oil and then set aflame. Into the construction of this fiery wall, there Iskander had penned into the north the destructive powers of the tribes of Gog and Magog, the Sakyas. Much later, when the Iranians became converted after a fashion to Islam, the guardian ancestor spirit changed to the prophet Khidr in the newer Iskander Nama, or Alexander tale, and Ahura became the angel Gabriel. Ahura Mazda, Allah, is you don't need to go anywhere in particular, but you raise yourself spiritually. Perhaps you go through stages to better connect, but neither under the name Ahura Mazda nor Allah did you have to go. Was it only a specific place or anything like that? Well, I mean, there were places of pilgrimage, but that's different. Actually, During the stay in Bactria, Alexandros did strike oil again. That is, his tent was found one morning to have been pitched beside a pool of translucent vapor oil that seemed from the ground like a spring of water. Both the Iranians and the diviners took this to be a favorable sign. Now, it's all favorable signs until you die of suffocation or illness or something, but we're not saying that happened here. For nearly 3 years of insistent hardship, aggravated by wounds, the king of the Macedonians had shown no evidence of mental exhaustion. But when at the end of the third winter, Bactria and Sogd and the northern frontiers were subjected, the new cities built and communications established, the strain showed in him. He did not sleep as well as when he had been on the march. He spent most of the night in hearing the multitudinous reports of his new administration, but he did make an end of this. He wanted to lie at the table with fruits and wine, in company with his entourage, to listen to talk, and often to talk himself, when drunk, until sunrise. Well, it's better that you sleep between dusk and dawn after, After such a heavy drinking bout, now he fell often into a stupor, watched over by the physicians and the royal bodyguards, since the defter, more politic Iranians knew how to praise and please him in such a stage of mental fatigue. He began to favor them openly over the dogmatic and blunt Macedonians. They in turn noticed that whoever had been closest to Alexandros in the past irritated him the most in his new mood. It was not that Alexandros had changed. His instincts had intensified. He seemed to be more aware of danger, and at the same time threw himself bodily where the danger was greatest. His anger had become deadly. He liked to confide in new personalities, who, not understanding him, were careful to treat him with reverence. He even developed a fondness for the new Greek mercenaries and Asiatics who had never been associated with his early campaigns. He hardly spoke to Callisthenes, who usually remained silent at the table. He no longer wanted to reason about what should be done or to be reminded of affairs at home. In a strange way, Macedonians at home had become antagonists in his imagination, although he wrote to Antipater and the others constantly, as if to justify himself. It was as if the elder Macedonian said his friends had become his enemies, and his enemies his friends. Black Clytus, now a regimental commander, was brother of Lanis, who had been Alexandros' nurse in childhood. So this burly companion had been a kind of foster brother to Alexandros, who knew besides that all of Lanis' own sons had been killed during his early campaigns. Black Clytus, moreover, had saved his life in the charge of the river Granicus. As all the army knew, Black Clytus was dumb in the head and disliked the new fashion of Persian dress and maneuvers. Black Clytus had been heard to say that Alexandros was no more than the son of Philip, king of the Macedonians. Well, no more than the king, that's not really saying much. Well, no more than the prince. Well, anyways. One evening, or rather morning, Alexandros had been pleased to order sacrifices made to the sons of Zeus, aiders of human beings. Now, just like the sons of Horus and that sort of mythology. But Ysir and Zeus and a lot of these things don't have to be personified in the male-female thing in terms of their name, and there's mythology that takes these as real names of a transcendent god. But a group of flatterers around him had seized the chance to whisper that their king was himself equal to the hero sons of Zeus. Callisthenes looked down into his empty wine cup. Some drunken soul struck up a ditty. West is bad and east is best. Some newly arrived Greeks remarked that the old-style Macedonian commanders had done well enough in the west, but had been thrashed by the Bactrian here. Alexandros smiled on them, and looked around for Black Clitus. That officer was not to be seen at the table, and the bodyguards explained that he was preparing the 2 lambs for sacrifice to the sons of Zeus as ordered. Alexandros, however, was pleased to call for Clitus. The companion veteran appeared after a few minutes in haste, with 2 lambs crowding at his heels, their heads dripping with sacrificial unguents. Black Clitus had been too mellow with wine himself to notice that the lambs followed him. "Here is Clitus, Alexandros," he shouted. It made a restless stir at the table, this apparition of the victims of sacrifice, which should have been left at the shrine. Angered, Alexandros motioned for Clitus to take his place at the table. West is bad and east is best, echoed again, and Clitus, drinking, heard for the first time the laughter over the Macedonians who had run from the Bactrians. He crashed the cup down, furious. "Those who died yonder in the hills were better men than you who laughed at them. Be careful," shouted someone, "whom you speak of." Filling his cup and drinking again, the big companion kept on muttering. He had room for no more than one idea in his head at a time. "I speak of the best men. I speak of those men who won victories for Philip, for the old army, at Chaeronea, at Thebes." Glaring around, he looked at Alexandros. "Speak up. Do you call them cowards?" "Be still," Alexandros shouted. The outcry and the babbling ceased, except for Clitus's hoarse voice. "Now, we freeborn may not speak our minds, but we can't speak to Philip's son." The older man got around Clitus, shaking him, and he lurched to his feet, stripping back the sleeve from the scarred arm. "Get back," he howled, and shook his arm with Alexandros, who was rigid with rage. That arm was good enough to save the life of Philip's son in the river Granicus. Now Clitus can't speak to him? "Speak," Alexandros snapped. "You won't be punished." Warily, Clitus shook his head, shoving the other officers away. "Oh, we Macedonians can't do that without leave from the Persian officials. We can't possibly without bowing down to your shining white Persian girdle. No, you can't punish us any more than we've been punished." Jumping up, Alexandros reached behind him for his sword, but his sword-bearer had been led from the pavilion by Ptolemy. "Trumpets," the king shouted, not in Greek, but in the old Macedonian speech. The trumpeter of the guard remained motionless behind him, and Alexandros crashed his fist into the man's face. The men around Clitus seized this chance to hurry him out of the pavilion entrance into the darkness, but they all heard Alexandros' shout, "Clitus!" Hearing that, the big companion lurched back, swinging the curtain aside. Dead drunk, he had heard the king's voice. "Here is Clitus, Alexandros." And Alexandros, catching a spear from a guard, leaped to meet him, thrusting the spear through him. When Clitus lay on the mat, gripping at the spear's haft, choking, the officers came around, not speaking. When Alexandros stared down at his friend and kneeled, trying to pull out the spear, the officers gripped the weapon, afraid that the king might kill himself with it. After a moment, Alexandros got to his feet and went out. Lurching through the curtain, he went to his tent and flung himself on the ground.